Yo, what's good? It's Miss Star. Today for y'all, I got a few things, right, that I really want to talk about with regard to some of the discourse that I've seen surrounding Dragon Age, the Veilguard, and how it relates to opinions on DA2 and Inquisition as well. Specifically talking about how some Dragon Age fans, a certain group within the camp that considers Origins their favorite Dragon Age game, simply don't want to give this new game in the series a chance, no matter what, and are just overly harsh of the sequels in this series as well. This video is going to be a long one, so there's going to be chapters and timestamps in the description. So if there's a certain section you want to jump to, it's all right there. This discussion is from the perspective of someone who considers Origins my favorite game in the series. I am what some in the community would call an Origins fan. At least sometimes. I do go back and forth between Origins and Inquisition being my favorite. But Origins was my introduction to Dragon Age and a game that made me fall in love with RPGs and high fantasy in general. Also, for simplicity's sake, I will be referring to this specific group within the DA community as Origin fans for the remainder of this video, even if I'm aware that not all DA Origins fans think like this, myself included. Again, it's just to keep things simple. So when I say Origins fans, know that I'm specifically talking about this subset of them that are seemingly very disgruntled, resistant to almost any change within the series, and are overall hypercritical, just to name a few things about them. I want to address a lot of the common complaints and or criticisms that I've heard about Veilguard from this section of the fan base after what little we've seen of it thus far, and explain to you why these critiques, in my opinion, either don't hold up to scrutiny and are the result of looking at the series past through rose-tinted glasses, or why some of these complaints are just completely unfounded, essentially the result of so-called fans looking for any reason to hate on this game, even if it's at the cost of using just straight up wrong or misremembered information. Also, there's going to be a bit of defending Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition from this group's opinions as well, because there is a bit of overlap in how they're already bashing this game and how they've unfairly judged those other sequels in the past. Spoilers ahead for the Dragon Age games. First things first, let's address what I consider the biggest point in this discussion, and it's that Dragon Age the Veilguard isn't even out yet. Like I said, we've seen very little of this game. So the level of hate that I've seen for it, coming from these Origins fans honestly surprises me for something that none of us have even played yet. I'll reiterate this again towards the end of the video, but the goal of this video isn't to say that Veilguard is going to be fantastic, 10 out of 10 for sure, right? Like, we don't know that yet. And to say that, it's a game beyond critique and if you don't like it, you're bad or wrong or whatever. In fact, towards the end of the video, I'm going to get into my own critique surrounding what we've seen of Veilguard so far, some of which many of you may also disagree with. Nah, the goal instead is simply to point out some of the flaws and commonly voiced criticisms, and to reiterate that we should wait until the game releases and play it for ourselves before passing some of these wide sweeping judgments, and to point out, that Origins fans may have it all wrong when it comes to the sequel games as well. Now, to get straight into the debunking, the biggest point of contention for Dragon Age the Veilguard is definitely the combat. Specifically, Origin fans seem to be staunchly and viciously opposed to anything other than the real time with pause, quote, hyper strategic and tactical, end quote, combat of Origins being used in the Dragon Age series of games. And Veilguard has a combat system that feels a lot more like Mass Effect with an action RPG focused style of fighting. So obviously they're quite upset about that. I've seen some say that they'd be okay with a turn-based combat system like we saw with Baldur's Gate 3 though. But in general, they really want that super strategic, tactical, and intentional combat that we had in Origins. And to that I say, did we play the same game? No, like seriously, did we play the same game? Like, I mean it. Leading up to Veilguard, I've been going back and playing all of the Dragon Age games again, and I recently completed a nightmare playthrough of Origins. And the combat is not something I would describe as strategic or tactical, really. To clarify, at least not to a level that it's so amazing that it becomes worth conforming the entire series combat systems to. And that was with a bunch of mods. I mean, that playthrough was heavily modded, with several of them that centered around improving combat, including things like balancing mods, expansions on specializations, animation improvements, and more. And even still, I would consider Origins combat just okay. Again, I say that as someone who considers this game one of my favorite in the series. I can say that pretty confidently. Like, once you hit a certain point in your Warden's build, you're gonna be using the same strategy and abilities for pretty much every fight with very little variation, as the enemy types and what they do in combat doesn't change much throughout the entire game. Even enemy mages who present the most challenge, they typically only use a few spells that, again, don't change much through a playthrough, and those are the only spells that really pose any real threat to your party. And once you learn how to deal with them, you're back to combat not having much variety or difficulty. I understand that there is a bit of depth there due to certain things like spell combinations, but again, what works for one fight is pretty much going to work for almost every fight. So that bit of extra depth ends up not meaning a whole lot if it works in every situation. To be fair, however, there are two exceptions to this lack of difficulty and variation of tactics, in my opinion. That being the DLC end bosses in Witch Hunt and Awakening. They were actually very difficult. I did game over a few times and had to really reevaluate the fight and my tactics to come out on top. It seems that BioWare was aware of their combat shortcomings in the base game, so they tried and succeeded a bit in rectifying some of them in the DLCs, at least for boss fights, which like over 90% of the time, you're not fighting bosses. Now, I understand that with context, Origins was supposed to be a game that followed Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, giving fans of those titles something that felt familiar but was also entirely new at the same time. And sure, I remember playing the game myself on release, being captivated and blown away by the combat, but now I wouldn't say it's so good that, again, it's worth making sure every game in the series has the same or similar system. Not only just in the tactical and strategic aspects, but in other areas, the combat is lackluster. Except for combat finisher animations, pretty much all weapon attacks, whether just basic attacks or weapon skills, severely lack impact. There's not really weight to anything involving weapons. Even some of the magic suffers from this as well. There are some great spells with a nice bit of chunky impact to them, like Fireball or Chain Lightning, but so many other spells, such as those from the Blood Magic tree, really lack the oomph and epicness that such a forbidden art should have. I mean, the blood magic that Jowen cast during the Circle of Mage at Origin looks cooler visually than anything we as a player can do with it in the game. So I hate to break it to y'all, but the combat of Origins is just not as good as you remember it. From the perspective of someone new to the series, I've recently been getting my wife into Dragon Age because of the new game coming out, and poor thing, she really doesn't vibe with the combat of Origins and mostly sees it as an obstacle, if anything. And before you start, Baldur's Gate 3 is her and my favorite game of all time. So it's not for lack of enjoying tactical combat systems, as she beat BG3 by herself for her first playthrough, and then we played it together in multiplayer. Also, combat is one of her favorite aspects of BG3 as well as Dungeons and Dragons, so it's not for lack of enjoying combat itself either. Again, Origin's combat system isn't all that great, but it's good enough, and building out your warden exactly how you want them with tons of options on offer across so many different spells or rogue/warrior talents is legitimately a lot of fun. However, the combat for sure isn't the reason why that game is so phenomenal. Related to all that, I played the Mass Effect trilogy for the first time with the release of the Legendary Edition back in 2021, and I feel like the action RPG combat there in 2 and 3 lent itself really well to feeling like an RPG and there being tactical elements to combat while still being action-packed in real time for the most part. Even though I am bummed about the party size in Veilguard being reduced from 4 to 3 party members when compared to previous games, and that seemingly we are stuck with only having access to 3 abilities at a time. These are valid criticisms and a direction I don't think BioWare should have went. I'll expand more on that, in my criticism section towards the end of the video. I do think that the combat here in Veilguard can still feel strategic and succeed in making you feel like you're coordinating with your party members, just like in the previous games. Even with the new combat system, as slowing the game down to select ally abilities at the right moment does lend itself to a nice tactical feel, and it worked great in Mass Effect, despite 2 and 3 only having access to a few abilities, and those games are beloved. So I think it'll work great here in Veilguard 2. In all of the Dragon Age games, thanks to customizing my party's AI behaviors in the tactics menu, I rarely had to switch to fully controlling a party member, and I've beaten all these games on their hardest difficulty. So I don't think the whole not having direct control over your party members thing will be the biggest deal, and I honestly feel like they can still nail the feeling of working together with your companions to overcome insane odds in battle. Now that I've picked apart that critique, hopefully you can see why I feel like it doesn't hold much weight. Sure, you may not like the direction combat is heading in this new installment, but it doesn't mean it'll make for a bad game or even a bad RPG. So outright declaring that to be the case before it's even here is a bad look in my opinion. And if Mass Effect 2 and 3 are any indicators, the combat can still feel very tactical and strategic, while most importantly being a lot of fun, even in an action RPG system, and feel right at home in a Dragon Age game. Also, side note, I've always felt that describing Inquisition in 2 as button mashy is a bit unfair, as in both games, you can simply just hold the attack button for auto attacks. The story and choice-making plot-wise with regards to companions has always been what makes Dragon Age special and fun, and I'm totally down for this action RPG combat system to change things up and try to make the combat just as fun as well. Lastly, to end this segment, I'm gonna say something controversial. I had more fun with combat in Dragon Age 2 than I did in Origins, and it was harder as I died more times in that game and had to pause way more often, even if the difficulty is artificial and not necessarily designed well. I will say though that Inquisition is my favorite combat-wise in the series, but I'd honestly argue that combat throughout the entirety of Dragon Age has never been what I consider phenomenal as a whole in any particular game. In all 3 of them, there were times where I'd get into combat and roll my eyes because I had just gotten out of a fight like 10 seconds ago and wanted to simply get to the next thing, whether it be a dialogue or continuing a quest, side objective, or what have you. Again, the combat isn't what makes these games awesome. There's aspects to combat in each of them that I enjoy and aspects that I don't. But when the Veilguard team says in interviews that this game will be the first entry in the series where, quote, the combat's actually fun, end quote, I honestly feel like there's some truth and hope to that statement based on what we've seen. Because again, while the combat has been fun in the previous games, it hasn't hit that amazing level just yet for me personally, and I feel like many other fans would agree. Next up, a really weird criticism I heard recently is that specifically, the women companions aren't conventionally attractive. We're not looking at the same women, are we? We can't be, because Nev looks stunning, and I'm particularly fond of her with her hair down. Just look at how beautiful she looks in her casual clothing while sporting very much conventionally attractive features, such as a perfect jawline, those nice, sharp cheekbones, flawless hair, flawless lip volume, and a perfect nose. Bellara is just outright cute. I mean, come on, while her design has a lot to it, I'd still consider her attractive, and yes, conventionally attractive as well. Sharp angled facial structure, captivating eyes, very nice full lips yet again, and perfectly groomed eyebrows, with her face markings excellently accentuating her features. What about her isn't conventionally attractive? Harding also looks really attractive in this game, and I say that as someone who, while I liked her character back in Inquisition, I wasn't really interested in her in that way, but her new hairstyle does a lot for me, and the freckles really accentuate her face, creating again a very conventionally attractive profile. All of these women could be models on Instagram. I don't understand this critique at all. I mean it. Right now, I'm gonna edit this later in the video, but right now, I'll show you a side-by-side of this great side profile picture of Bellara and just a random image I find when doing a Google image search for Asian Instagram models. Come on, when I show it to you, when you see it on screen, it's gonna be come on, Just come on, right? Like, I understand why having romance options that you aren't attracted to in a game like this would suck. I can sympathize with that, as romance options are something I enjoy a lot in RPGs myself. So if you genuinely don't find them attractive, that is a bummer, and it's definitely subjective. But to call them not conventionally attractive, it's just outright wrong. These new women companions may have designs that are very layered and complex, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't conventionally attractive. Instead, it seems to me that some of these older fans are upset because they aren't as, and I'm sorry to say this, basic in design as some of the previous women companions were. Look, even with the introduction of our new romance options in Veilguard, Morrigan is still my favorite romance option in the Dragon Age series in terms of look and personality, followed closely by Cassandra. So one could argue that, hey, my taste is somewhat basic, but let's be real. Her design, Morgan's design in the past, was very much just generic hot goth woman, and that's okay. That's why I love her. But I'm also willing to grow and realize that her new design is also incredibly attractive and badass. Long story short, when discussing this complaint, if you're boring, just say that. Just I'm kidding. I'm kind of kidding, but okay, right? Also, as you can see, I didn't include Tash. I think it's Tash, not sure, in this section. Not for lack of attractiveness, but simply because I haven't seen anything hard on whether they're a non-binary character or supposed to be masculine or feminine presenting or somewhere in between. So since this critique is levied at the women, I stuck to Nev, Balara, and Harding for now. Another common critique is that the spirit of Dragon Age just hasn't been there since Origins, and while that is heavily subjective, I personally disagree. I feel like the lore and universe from a plot perspective has not only been incredibly consistent, but also getting better and better with each game. The story and choices you make has been what's kept Dragon Age alive all this time, and the lore and lore revelations surrounding this series throughout the years have just been getting better and better. We've had so many awesome lore moments throughout both 2 and Inquisition. Sandal's prophecy, learning more about Qunari society, discoveries about the Titans and ancient elven society, blighted Red Lyrium, learning that the seekers of truth for years have known that tranquility can be reversed. Oh, and pretty much everything surrounding Mythal and Solus. Not to mention all the cool companion stuff from the sequels. Like, if you told me that you think Cole's origin story isn't incredibly dope, I would call you a liar. All of these and more are just beautiful world building, perfectly in line with the epicness that is Dragon Age as a whole. The next critique I'm going to tackle is one about the series overall that I've heard a lot from Origin fans when discussing Veilguard, and it's that Dragon Age just isn't as dark or gritty anymore like Origins was, pointing to what we've seen so far from Veilguard as an example, but they've also been saying the same thing about 2 and Inquisition for a while now. My rebuttal to that is, did y'all forget about things like in Hushed Whispers from Inquisition and how brutal the potential future of Thetis looked in that game? Watching Liliana become a shell of herself after enduring years of torture. What about the Red Lyrium infested Templars and some of their grotesque enemy designs? And what about in Dragon Age 2 and all the crazy, just inhumane things Bartrand did to his mercenaries while under the influence of the Red Lyrium idol? Watching, your sibling get ripped apart by an ogre in the first few minutes of a new playthrough, having multiple companions backstab you in the Fade during the Night Terrors mission. Or what about how brutally mages are treated in Kirkwall, being forced into undergoing the Rite of Tranquility for even the smallest of infractions? I could go on and on for both games, but essentially both 2 and Inquisition have plenty of dark or greedy moments and themes. Yes, even when compared to Origins. To say that these games don't handle mature subject matter in a mature way when compared to the first game is just outright false. There's plenty of assault, violence, murder, abuse, betrayal, and all sorts of other awful things that can make for dark and compelling plot elements and lore. Take the Oculara as another example. Tools made by the Venatori from the skull of mages made tranquil that they hunted down in order to locate these mysterious shards. scattered across the land. They would, they literally would forcibly possess these docile former mages in order to harvest their remains, their skulls, for their own needs. That's dark as hell. The Wicked Eyes and Wicked Hearts mission that takes place in Orlais is chock full of political deceit, lies, and backstabbing too. Just because the art style is stylized and brighter in some areas, it doesn't mean that the games themselves aren't dark in theme or plot. Origins fans also love to use the presence of difficult choices and tough to stomach lore elements in the first game to point to it being superior to the other two games in terms of its darkness and grit. And by extension, they try to justify that Veilguard will seemingly follow a downward trend in those elements that they claim also took place with 2 and Inquisition. They cite specific examples from Origins, such as the tough choice regarding siding with the werewolves or not, and the backstabbing politics and rigid caste society of the Dwarves. And to that point, I honestly feel like this group of Origin fans we're talking about went into DA2 and Inquisition and are now going into Veilguard just determined to not like these games or something. Either that or they were playing them blindfolded and with earplugs, because both those difficult choices and tough to stomach lore elements are plentiful in both 2 and Inquisition. Some examples include for DA2, potentially making a decision to kill Anders, a companion of yours, not just for that game, but also during the Awakening expansion in Origins. Someone you as a player got to know very well, but may end up feeling like you have no choice but to end them. Deciding on whether or not Bartrand should die right in front of Varric, his brother. Oh, we can't forget that having to witness and play through the horrific passing of your own mother, your own mama, who, mind you, wasn't just some mentioned background character. This was someone you could interact with throughout the entire game up until that point. You literally escape the blight and make it out from being essentially refugees together. You have these potential heartfelt dialogues with this character surrounding your sibling, and the game just offs her in a horrific way right in front of you. And for Inquisition, we got a potential gut-wrenching choice on who to leave behind in the Fade, and Here Lies the Abyss. The choice of who the next Divine will be is also in our hands. It's big to consider our allies' personalities and faults to determine who is most fit to lead the organization that is the Chantry with its massive influence. You witness a large section of Grey Wardens essentially become a tool for evil, becoming corrupted under Corypheus's deceit. These were our heroes in previous games, and in this one, they're performing these unspeakable acts. And let's not forget that Solus has decided he is going to put into motion a plan, right? A plan to return the elves to their former glory, even if the other races have to perish in order to do so. And it's honestly a great moral dilemma of, can we really blame him after the hundreds and hundreds of years of subjugation and oppression he has witnessed his people endure that we've only seen a taste of during 3 games? Those are just a few examples. I don't want to spend the entire video on this one thing, but there are moments I feel like Origin fans heavily overlook when trying to state that 2 and Inquisition aren't dark or gritty. I'm sure that Dragon Age fans could provide you with plenty more examples. Matter of fact, leave some more in the comments if they come to mind. And I personally, after going through all 3 games again recently, can attest to the fact that there is plenty of darkness and grit to be had in 2 and Inquisition. Even if the entire game isn't a shade of brown, muddy, visually like Origins is. It's a joke. I'm aware that Origins isn't muddy brown visually throughout the whole game. I'm aware of that. I'm actually very fond of its visuals still, even with all these years later, but still, 2 and Inquisition are plenty dark and gritty. Also, because I can't find anywhere else to put this, I'll just mention it here following the dark and gritty segment to address the complaint of, oh, Origins wasn't afraid to be sexy, and that the games have become less sexy over time, so surely Veilguard will follow suit. In the first game, there were desire demons, and there was all these spicy scenes. You could even engage in casual physical intimacy. My answer to that is, just so you know, unmodded, the intimacy scenes in Inquisition show the most skin throughout the entire series, like completely revealing even more than Origins. So that take, just plain out, isn't true. Yes, Inquisition doesn't have, say, a brothel, but you can engage physically with multiple companions and enjoy multiple romance scenes in a single playthrough. Also, why even use the casual intimacy for this point? If you laid with Isabella in Origins, there's no cutscene. You don't get to see anything, nothing, nada. You don't get to see anything that you would really like to, right? Same with all the workers in the Pearl. You just see him in bed in underwear for like a few seconds. I'm not kidding. You can go back and check. Like, I'm not kidding. There's no scenes to speak of. Is that the sexiness you so desperately find missing from 2 as well as Inquisition, and are worried / positive that Veilguard won't have or be on the same level as? Like, yes, I enjoyed the spicy scenes in Origins, but let's not pretend they're these extremely high quality animated, lengthy, and awesome scenes worthy of being put on a pedestal to make a point and say, look at how unafraid Origins was to be sexy. 2 and Inquisition could never, and Veilguard would never. Like, come on. Baldur's Gate 3 romance scenes, right, were received to much fanfare and praise, so it's no surprise that in recent interviews, the Veilguard team has revealed that yes, there will be intimacy scenes, with some being more spicy than others in this new game, while others may be more sensual or containing other traits depending on who you romance. So if anything, from interviews, it seems like Veilguard will be better than Origins in that regard. And this isn't a surprise either, because like I said, Inquisition actually shows the most skin. And then if a common complaint I hear is, well, Veilguard is very much an extension of Inquisition, or rather feels more similar to that game, then by all accounts, this critique holds no weight. In fact, the only point this critique has is, but there's no seductive desire demons. And to that, you are correct. As of right now, we haven't seen any desire demons in Veilguard yet, and they are Inquisition. At least I don't believe they are, right? But I'd argue that the omission of this one enemy doesn't mean that the series is afraid of being, or has gotten less, risque over time. Look at Origins Isabella and Liliana, and then look me in the face and tell me that their designs, that they're somehow more carnal in nature than Nev in her casual outfit with her hair down and showing a fair bit of chest. You can't. I'm sorry. You simply can't. Obviously, Morgan is more promiscuous in design, but that's just one character. It doesn't refute the entire point on her own. Now let's take a look at this nonsense surrounding some comments I've been seeing from Origin fans crying about Veilguard being subject to forced diversity. I'm not even going to entertain this one for very long, because it's kind of ridiculous to me as a longtime fan who's actually been paying attention to the setting of Thedas. But some people, they're saying things like, oh, what happened to all the white guys? Or this game has heavy white male erasure. Like, bro, come on now. Come on now. Let's be real. First of all, you have characters such as Varric, Solas, Emmerich, who's a little bit tan, he's from Navarre, but maybe you could count him as a white dude, right? And Lucanus, all present in this game, all white dudes. Then you have Harding and Morgan returning, also major characters, and they're white women. All of those important characters, combined with the fact that you could make your Rook to be white as well, means that you could have a playthrough comprised of plenty Eurocentric looking characters. So to me, it seems like those complaints hold no weight. None, zero, zilch, nada, right? On top of that, Thedas is a very culturally diverse setting where you have locations, yes, like Ferelden or Ley and the Free Marches that mimic some of our real world, European cultures. But you have locations such as Ravane, Antiva, and Navarra that mimic other diverse nations of our own world as well. So the setting of Thedas has always been one that was quite diverse. It's just that the first few games took place largely in areas where you typically only came across Eurocentric looking individuals. But Veilguard seems to be an adventure that spans the entirety of Thedas, thanks to the Illuvians. So it will be a game in the series that truly highlights how culturally diverse the setting is and has always been. Lastly, I want to address a criticism on companions. Origins fans have already completely judged and dismissed our new batch of companions based on what little we've seen of them from a few trailers and like 20 minutes of gameplay. I've heard from a specific YouTuber's video, someone whose other videos I've liked in the past, by the way, that companions in Origins were the best we've ever had in the series. That in general, they have more heart, spirit, and wit than the other ensembles of companions we've had since then. Look, this is subjective, so I don't think I'm going to be able to poke as many holes in this critique as I've been able to with the others, but I will say and reiterate that we haven't played Veilguard yet. So it's far too quick to see some of these, wide sweeping judgments on these characters' personalities, what makes them tick. Also, in my personal opinion, while yes, the Origins companions are heavily enjoyable, I had a lot of fun with them. Again, they're kind of basic. And by that, I mean mostly one note throughout the entire playthrough, but undergoing potential dramatic changes towards the tail end of the game personality-wise, with the exception of Morgan, Nathaniel, and Shale, in my opinion. They're a bit more complex from the start. They are very witty. They do have a lot of heart and spirit, and their stories are legitimately enjoyable. But after playing all the games recently, I don't really see all that much more of those qualities in them compared to the ensembles in 2 and Inquisition. Isabella is tragic in her troubled past, so much so that she almost refuses to allow herself to be loved. Fenris, at least in my game, battles with this intense hatred for mages while finding a friend in my Hawk who happens to be a mage and is conflicted and just in general struggles with wanting to let go of this hatred he has internally and just move on with his life. Anders is going through an internal conflict I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy due to his intense back and forth in the pursuit of simple freedom from persecution and desire for justice for mages. Dorian constantly fights in a land far away from home, filled with people that hate him because of where he calls home. Cole is just I just love his character. Okay, I love Cole's character. His backstory is just awesome as a tale in general, and watching him flip back and forth between spirit and person, resulting ultimately in us choosing which direction to guide him entirely as a being, is one of my favorite parts of Inquisition. Cassandra is my go-to love interest in Inquisition, and she is so compelling in that she has this really tough exterior and is incredibly duty-bound, but has an interior of femininity, sweetness, and is just a hopeless romantic at heart. And Solas is, he just has a lot going on, all right? Like, he has a lot going on. As you can see, I didn't talk about all the companions, but I feel like saying they lack heart, wit, or even depth is disingenuous. Watch banter compilations from both 2 and especially Inquisition to see my point. I was cracking up at more than a few lines, but also considered just as many heartwarming or deep. And that's going to do it for addressing those criticisms / critiques. But I want to reiterate that none of the Dragon Age games are flawless. Origins fans may be overly harsh of 2 and Inquisition, but they do have faults, and there's plenty of legitimate criticism to be thrown their way. 2 was obviously rushed, and it shows. It definitely shows. And Inquisition missed heavily in terms of some of that open world busy work it had you doing sometimes. But I will also admit that there are, of course, some critiques that are valid regarding Veilguard as well, based on what we've already seen and have been told about the game prior to its release. Some of those critiques that I have personally, I think that the redesigns of the demon enemies, they aren't great. I think they looked awesome before with how they were in Inquisition and prior, and while I think redesigning them or touching them up a little bit would have been fine, it should have been done so with the original design identity in mind. But on a positive note, the other enemy designs look great. Like the Darkspawn you see Harding turn to stone in the newest trailer, and just the other Darkspawn enemies we see, they look amazing. They look amazing, so I am glad that a lot of the other enemy designs look really dope. Again, the party size reduction is disappointing and a bad move in my opinion. Having a party of 4 was perfect in that no matter what class you chose for your character, you could always bring along one each of the other classes your companions made up to achieve great party balance. But now things are just kind of thrown off by being limited to only 3 party members. For example, I always play a mage. Every single time I'm playing a mage, and I really want either Nev or Balara in my party based on their personalities, as well as one of them is going to end up being my romance option. But now that means I have 2 mages and only have 1 slot for either a rogue or warrior, leading to my party feeling almost incomplete. I don't know if it's going to feel right when compared to how I had it set up in previous Dragon Age games. Piggybacking off of the party size reduction, I'll mention again how I don't think only having 3 active, I do think only having 3 active abilities is also a big letdown, as I did enjoy having this hotbar just full of skills or spells in all of the previous Dragon Age games. So I'm hoping, really hoping that we at least have 2 or 3 sets of those abilities that we could swap between on the fly mid-combat. But here's hoping it doesn't end up being too simple and that there is still room for plenty of skill/build expression. We'll just have to wait and see. Mass Effect 2 and 3 also only had a few skills to use at any one time, with those games being still a lot of fun while the combat felt tactical throughout the entire games. But I'll admit, for Dragon Age, having at least 6 skills would still be nice. Like, come on, Bioware. There's still time. Y'all gonna tweet that one, right? And yes, the art style can not be to your liking. That's fair. I don't got nothing to say about that. Like, although I don't necessarily see the whole plasticky aspect that some Origins fans are talking about, but hey, you don't have to like it. Calling a game outright bad for it, though, I think is a bit unfair. But it seems perfectly in good taste to say, hey, the art style and just how the game looks presentation wise in terms of style choices, it just isn't for you for whatever reason. It seems it's completely fine to say that. The seeming lack of backstory being present in game for your character that you actually play through a bit is something that I do find myself missing that we had in Dragon Age 2, but especially I miss how it was in Origins. Like, I really do. Even with DA2, I felt like Hawk had a place in the world because we played through some of his origin with regard to coming to Kirkwall and a lot of early game exposition in dialogue directly referencing their backstory. And Origins, obviously, that was all cranked up to 10, really. I missed that a lot in Inquisition, and I'll miss it in Veilguard too. I like that we do get to pick an origin of sorts, essentially in Veilguard, in the form of an organization or faction that makes up a large part of our past. It is referenced a lot in dialogue and will apparently be a big part of your playthrough, and even add some replay value by, you wanting to go back and try those different origins, but not playing through, not getting to do gameplay through that origin choice specifically is definitely a big bummer. Even playing through it for like an hour max would be really dope, but at least the words are hard. The implementation of it in Veilguard seems to be a big improvement over not having anything like it in Inquisition. As I wrap up this video, I really just want to say to Origins fans, replay all of these games if you got the time. You'll find that Origins isn't as infallible as you remember, and that 2 and Inquisition are not nearly as bad as you think they are when compared to Origins. On the contrary, they're actually quite good when compared to that game. Again, the goal of this video wasn't to say that the sequels in Veilguard are beyond criticism. I just wanted to point out some flaws in those commonly voiced critiques, like I said, and remind people to wait and actually play this game for themselves before judging it so widely before it comes out. I hope that you've enjoyed this discussion though. I tried really hard to provide great counterpoints, and it took a good while to put this script together, but overall, I'm happy with how it came out, and I think I argued my points well and did a pretty solid job altogether. Be sure to comment down below on what you think about some of these criticisms or critiques. Do you agree with Origins fans, or do you think they're misinterpreting the older games while at the same time being hypercritical of Veilguard without reason? Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and remember to keep things civil, as at the end of the day, what we all want is for games that we think are good to be released out to the public. As always, I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Be easy.